Welcome to the Reawakening Ancient Feminine Wisdom in Pregnancy, Birth, and Motherhood Summit. I'm your host, Nancy Lucina, and today Rachael Alaia will be joining us. Rachael is the creator of Wild Soul Wellness and the host of the podcast, Feral Intercourse, Conversations with Wild Women. She serves as a kind of midwife to those reclaiming their wildness, guiding women back to the knowing that they are powerful forces of nature. Rachael is known for creating and facilitating spaces that are both nourishing and evocative, comforting and expansive, spaces in the interwebs and in the flesh that honor all of you and your human experience. In today's conversation, Rachael shares her postpartum journey with us, and we discuss why it's not only okay, but also important to allow ourselves to feel the full range of our emotions as we step into motherhood. Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have with us Rachael Alaia from Wild Soul Wellness. Welcome, Rachael.
Thanks, Nancy.
So happy to have you here.
Yeah.
So I want to start by actually reading a quote of yours that I got off your site, and then I thought you could kind of expand upon that. Okay. So you say, I recognize how many of my own assumptions, pre-existing notions, and limited definitions of motherhood, even those meant to be, quote, empowering, have actually obstructed my ability to exist authentically, mother wholeheartedly, and be present with my life.
Yeah. Okay, expand on that. Well, we come into motherhood often with these ideas about how they're going to be, whether they're like positive or negative. And even if they're, quote, positive or negative, they can actually stop us from being fully present with ourselves and our lives and our kids. And it's interesting because I've been working as a mother with this idea of both and rather than either or. And the idea with both and is that you can hold more of it all. And specifically, you can hold very contradictory ideas. So coming into motherhood with your empowering ideas about how you want it to be, or coming into motherhood with maybe the traumas that you have from your own mother line or your experiences as a child. Those are all going to be there regardless of if we try to let them go or not. But we can also work on both and, the and being just being really radically present with what is, regardless of our preconceived notions or ideas about how we think it's going to be or what kind of triggers come up when we're mothering or giving birth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I obviously have followed your work for a while. So I know that you are willing to be with everything that is, and you're willing to be with the shadow sides too. And I've been personally reflecting upon that so much this past year too, around like what actually is alchemy for me, like how do things get naturally transformed? And for me, it is that exact process of just simply being with what is and not trying to escape it. So I'd love to kind of move into postpartum. I was actually your doula. So you had an amazing birth, in my opinion, like through my eyes, it was just so gorgeous.
And it was in this room that I'm sitting in too.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And so like, talk to us about what happened after birth and your postpartum period and what that kind of looked like the rite of passage into motherhood.
Yeah. Okay. So it's even hard to find the words sometimes, I think. And two, what I want to say about being with is that it's not even necessarily about being with something that you want to escape, but also being with something that you want to maybe do anything with, right? Is again this both and characteristic of like not wanting to change it or make it anything different than it is.
Mm-hmm.
But realizing that the natural course of life and nature is change.
Mm-hmm.
I often go to this quote from David White, who is an amazing poet, who talks about transformation really just being a conversation with life. And if you're just engaging in that conversation, then the alchemy will naturally happen,
Mm.
um, which I think is a really beautiful way to put it. But in terms of this transition into motherhood, I had a really amazing team around me when I was giving birth, including yourself, Nancy. I also had 2 incredible Mexican midwives. And I decided to do a traditional Mexican practice of the cuarentena, which is 40 days in home, um, pretty much just creating a cocoon around myself and my baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because I was reflecting on this the last couple of days and preparing to speak with you, Nancy, um, and this quote from a friend of mine, Genevieve Slonim from Birth of a Mama, kept coming up, and that is, who is mothering you as a new mother? And during this cuarentena, traditionally, a mother had she was very mothered as she was in this transition. And that takes on a lot of different qualities, whether it is like physical healing practices or having your normal kind of day-to-day responsibilities taken over by someone else, having someone there like walking you through breastfeeding, walking you through the very new, very foreign practices that become a part of your day-to-day. And I had some of that. But it's interesting, like I was thinking about one of the things is this idea of social exclusion. And so when you're kind of in this cocoon, you remove yourself from the kind of natural socializing that's done, especially in if you come from white culture or Western culture, like I do, where the woman is kind of expected to entertain her family after she gives birth, or, you know,
host
relatives or whatever it is, right? And it was really interesting because for a few months, actually, I got really socially isolated. And at first it was a personal choice of mine, like an active, okay, I'm gonna like have this time so that I can bond with my child. But then I started realizing some things about that social exclusion. And that is, interestingly, when I went into this very collectivist practice of cuarentena, I carry with me all of my hyper individualized, socialized ways of whiteness. And so those things coming together as they did, like it didn't end up as I expected it to. And I ended up feeling pretty abandoned by a lot of the friends that I had in my life and a lot of the kind of social activities that I had previously that I no longer had anymore. And something that I've been reflecting on a lot since becoming a mother is the changing sort of social atmosphere that I engage with, or how that's changed, I should say. And one of the things that you know you wanted to bring up in this space, I know, is kind of this this dissolution of self or the ego. And I was thinking about that a lot because I look around at some of the I guess the activities that I was engaging with before and the social circles that I engage with, and there is such a hyper individualism within those circles or within those practices. And like becoming a mom, it's no longer just about the me show, right? And that is so, I think that is the biggest shift, especially coming from Western culture, which is very hyper individualistic. So all of a sudden you're meant to be in relation to something, and that is your baby, your child. And you start to recognize and realize all of the relationships around you. rather than it being a kind of like self-serving, even if it's subconscious or unconscious, it really becomes this like, whoa, I have to be hyper aware and conscious of all of the relationships that I have in my life and how I'm investing myself, and if they're nourishing, if they're, you know, if they're really mothering me as I need to be, almost. Because our friends do mother us, and our own mothers do as well, but it's not just from our maternal line that we get mothering. We also get it from our friends. And so just realizing that is has been a really challenging and also really enlightening for me.
Yeah, I bet. What do you think, like, how do you think we could prepare mothers more holistically for that transition? Do you think that there's certain things? It's always so hard, I find, like when you're pregnant, especially with your first child, you just don't know until you know, right? So like, I don't know, is there anything now that you've gone through this yourself, and your baby is over a year now?
Yep.
So like, you know, you've had a good chunk of this postpartum time. Is there anything that you wish you could have gotten during the prenatal period to help you better, or, you know, go through that transition a little smoother?
Yeah. I think something that's happened for me in the last year has been, because I think when I was pregnant, and this is pretty natural, is that you kind of go inward and you start to kind of unravel and understand your own personal mythos or your own stories. And maybe because it was my first child, and I just was kind of talking about the me show and the individualism, like it kind of takes on a certain quality of that, right? A certain quality of like, okay, like what am I bringing into this, or what part of me is dying, or how is my own story changing, or what stories do I hold about mothering, etc. And since becoming a mother, it's really kind of, I've almost zoomed out or expanded that understanding as to like, okay, what are my cultural stories? You know, what are the stories that I've been socialized into? And where do I stand within all of that, within the kind of like global or cultural mythos? And I don't know if that would have been helpful prior to giving birth, prior to officially becoming a mother. But recognizing that I don't just carry my own personal stuff, I also carry everything of my culture, everything from my lineage, everything from all that is happening on earth right now. And so I think finding myself in that has been a little bit, definitely transformative, very uncomfortable in many ways, particularly around the issues of, you know, patriarchy and white supremacy and capitalist culture, that we're all kind of, you know, like quote unquote swimming in.
Right.
And recognizing that might have been helpful for me as I was making the transition to motherhood. But then again, I don't know. I'm not sure that it would have.
Right.
So I really just think that probably the most incredible thing that I did to prepare myself was to deepen into trusting myself. Incredibly. I mean, like, trust was probably the biggest, and I'm actually like getting goosebumps right now. But
oh yeah, I was getting goosebumps too when you're talking.
So like being able to trust yourself, whether it's trusting your body to be able to give birth, or trusting that you'll figure it out, you know, if shit goes down, that you'll be able to make the right decision, even though there really isn't like a quote unquote right decision. We're all going to make decisions based on all of the stories and everything that I've been speaking to. Right. And so what feels and is right for us, and trusting that, was the the biggest sort of preparation that I did in becoming a mother. And that's also not to say that like there weren't many, many, many times of questioning that trust, of feeling totally lost, of feeling totally disconnected, but like also recognizing that that's not a pathology. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Like that is a part of the process.
Yep.
And so I think all of the shadow work that I've done leading up to becoming a mother, and you know, I think to give a little bit of context as to what that is, you know, it's this idea that we are both, and we are beings of light and we are beings of darkness, actually, and we hold both within us. And so as we can recognize that, you know, the more we understand our capacity for darkness, and the more we become intimate with those, especially parts of us that maybe our culture or our family or our kind of like personal stories tell us aren't okay, or you know, are even just yeah, I think mostly it's been for me this opening up to all of my feelings as valid, and as wanting to be seen and be heard and be felt. And that is a whole lifelong process. But I think the more we can practice being with our own stuff, the more I think we can be present with our children, who are going to be, you know, feeling all of the feels, and wanting to know what they are, and wanting to have a kind of roadmap to developing a certain intelligence around those feelings.
Yeah. When you were going through like the darker periods, or maybe the periods where your foundation felt like it was really like, woo, you know, and where you maybe doubted that, or you lacked that trust in the moment, what were and what are your allies, you know, so to speak, when you're working in those spaces? What really helps you to continue to be with?
It's a really good question. And I, as an environmental educator, is my professional kind of background, my academic background. And I'm also a witch. So recognizing that, and understanding our deep interconnectedness with the earth, I think going to the earth is always my ally, in whatever form or capacity that might look like. It's interesting. I was kind of like joking around with myself the other day, because when I was in my sort of nesting phase in pregnancy, I was following all these like accounts on Instagram that had like all these amazing plants, like indoor plants. And I was like, I need to make my house like this indoor plant sanctuary. And I'm looking now, and like all of the plants that I bought like back when I was pregnant are all like massive now. And they're all like vines everywhere. And I'm like, this is what I wanted, right?
Oh, that's so cool.
But even just like creating a space that feels nourishing to you. Like my Venus is in Pisces. So like I need everything to be really beautiful, right? So if my environment feels nourishing and beautiful to me, then I feel held a little bit more safely. But back to the original thing that I was saying was, going to the earth, like regularly bathing in the ocean, you know, regularly taking my feet off and going for a walk, even if my baby was there, you know, and I think more recently it's been in knowing that it's okay to ask for my needs to be met. Because I think as mothers, it's very, very difficult for us to do that, because we are always keeping another being or other beings in our realm of like needs met, right? And so ours can often take the back seat. And there's like this sort of unapologetic nature that I feel like I'm growing into, where I say to my partner, for instance, you're going to watch our son at this time because I'm going to go do what I need to do for myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's so hard. That's like still really hard for me, and even hard for like my son's godmother, who I talk to all the time. And you know, I have a girlfriend who I spend a lot of time with who had triplets about 4 or 5 months after me.
I
And
actually know her. Yeah.
yeah, so just recognizing that we do have needs that we need to meet that are beyond the realm of mothering and motherhood, that sometimes require us to reach out and get support. And also recognizing just within that the different layers of privilege too, because I think that, you know, sometimes I recognize that like the systems and structures that I have for my life, you know, whether it was the quarantena that I did for myself, or being able to tell my husband, or my partner, I should say, we're not married, being able to tell my partner, like, you need to watch our son at this time, or, you know, calling up my friend who can be a babysitter. Like, these are all privileges. Like, not everyone has these things. And so I'm really, really grateful that I have the capacity to do that. But I know that there are within all of our lives, you know, little, I'm almost seeing like cracks, you know, where we can go through and be in this sort of like womb space of protection of like, okay, even if it's just closing my eyes and coming back to my breath, like breathing 10 times deeply, like that is a resource. You know, even if it's just going to sleep an extra 30 minutes before, when I could be up and like doing all the things because my baby's asleep, right? Like recognizing where the small bits of resources of help are in our lives can always be invaluable, no matter our level of privilege.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I would actually love to talk to you about, because you mentioned about the patriarchy and like swimming in that, right? And for me, I think when I became a mother, that became more obvious in a way because
Yeah.
I came to this place of like, well, I personally, where I was in my life, I was like, well, I don't want a career right now. Like, I actually just want to be with my baby, you know, for this whole year or whatever it was. But like, I felt actually a lot of this outside pressure, you know, I think because of those paradigms that we exist in. So I'd love if you could speak to that a little bit about how perhaps your career, because you work for yourself essentially, you have your own business, how that shifted when you became a mom, and like what kind of stories were running through your head around that. What have you had to unravel in that sense? That's probably a big question. So
Well, it's very on the forefront for me right now. And so I appreciate you asking me, because I've just decided to kind of step away from the demands that I've been putting on myself that are internalized forms of, you know, the capitalist system that we hold in the patriarchy, and all of those hierarchical forms of oppression really that become internalized when we're growing up in these cultures. I took a maternity leave that was, I think, like officially 6 weeks before and 6 weeks after I gave birth. And I gave birth actually on my due date, so it worked out perfectly. And at the time, I was leading an online program, and it was just for women. And I announced when I got pregnant that I was planning on taking this maternity leave. And so I had to shift some things around because I had certain, you know, responsibilities and contractual obligations to these women. And so I ended up coming back, but it was very, very part-time. I think it was about, you know, no more than really like max 2-3 hours a week. But I should say that about a month before I gave birth, my partner and I started a different business, which basically meant that like he was leaving every day and not really present with being able to be present with me because he was focused so much on building and growing that business and that baby, you know, that yeah, I did feel kind of abandoned a lot of times by him and his focus on the business. And then me, you know, I had this program that I was leading, and I think it lasted for another like 3 or 4 months after I came back from my maternity leave. And then that program ended, and I was kind of like, okay, well, now what? You know, I could do one-on-one work that I was doing, but I wasn't really feeling called to do that. And I kind of just sat with it for a while, and I ended up getting really inspired to create a space for mothers and around mothers and mothering, called Wild Mother, which ended up being a 3-month conversation series and community around mothering on our own terms, really, and exploring the identity of motherhood. And that was really beautiful. And that wrapped up in November. And again, I was kind of in this space of like, okay, now what? And as a writer too, I'm constantly being drawn into the sort of like flame of writing as transformation, and also recognizing that writing these days, the art of writing, isn't sort of like a high paying or you know, highly valued work. But I kept getting the message that, you know, this online work that I was doing was really taking me away from being able to be present with my son as I could, and being able to support the other side business that my partner had. But I have to say, like, there is a mourning that's happening. You know, I've decided to kind of like deactivate my Facebook and step away from Instagram, and, you know, take this time off the computer, offline, to be in the physicality of my life a little bit more. And there's a lot of voices in my head that are saying, you failed, you know. And it took me weeks and weeks and weeks to really just build up the courage to like think about potentially stepping away for a time, you know. And even if this time is to like write a book, for instance, which is a feeling that I have, that this time is going to be for, like, there's the stories of like, okay, if you're not constantly putting content out, if you're not constantly engaging with people, then they're going to forget about you. And then if you want to self-publish, you're never going to be able to self-publish. You know, like, there's all of these stories that I hold, and all of these ideas that like, okay, like, but that's there, both, and that's there, and I can still choose to step away and know that I'm supported and trust that. But it's so scary, Nancy. Like, the stories that we come up against and the resistance that we feel in ourselves, and, you know, all of that is so valid and so real. And it also can be there, and we can hold another thing too, right? Because we are mothers, we hold these contradictions, we are able to do that.
Yep. Yeah, I felt like so tender as you were talking about it, because I just recognized different parts of myself in your story, and so many women, right? And it's funny because like you said that you had this voice that kept saying, oh, it means that you failed or something. And it's like, I look at you and I'm like, oh my God, what like a brilliant, successful, amazing woman, you know, and how we have these own internal dialogues that are so contrary. It's just, for me, it's actually really fascinating. And there's like that piece around productivity. You're not a person if you're not like productive or something. That's really an old story that we have to work through as women and as new mothers. I think especially when we're actually moving more toward valuing our children rather than these other things, you know. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Well, I think probably we should wrap up, although I could talk to you for a long time. Well, actually, before I get to my very last question, the next thing was going to be around like how people can find you. And so you were just talking about how you're taking a little bit of a break, but tell us what, what you have going on at the moment. You just finished this offering. So how could people stay in touch with you if they want to find you?
Sure. I'm really happy to offer people a chance to engage with the offering that I just created, which is a series of conversations, and they're all still available online. So if you're interested in that, it's called Wild Mother. You can email me, absolutely, and we can figure out an exchange that works. I'm always really open to alternative forms of exchange because I'm ready to smash capitalist systems and create other forms of exchange. So yeah, that's an offering that isn't live, but it is available. And we're those spaces were, and those conversations were really transformative for a lot of the people who engaged with them. Right now, my website is still technically up. You can join my email list, which is at www.wild-soul.net. And I'm going to be sending out periodic email updates to the people who are on there. I also still have a podcast, so I'm going to keep that going, which you can listen to. And it's
an
called
amazing podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's called Feral Intercourse: Conversations with Wild Women. And I actually am going to be attending to that a little bit more. I took a break coming into motherhood and haven't been putting out episodes as regularly, but I'm creating kind of an editorial calendar. And that's something that I really do love to do and do really feel nourished by still. So I really felt like I wanted to continue that. So you can find that on iTunes or on SoundCloud. Or if you're looking for the show notes, you'll find those at wild-soul.net/get-feral. It's a little confusing.
Cool. We can link it to.
Okay.
Yeah.
But other than that, I live here in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which is on the west coast of Mexico. And I'm going to be working a little bit more on creating some in-person offerings or being able to meet face to face with people. I was saying in my my Facebook update, or my Facebook goodbye, I should say, that I'm a bit introverted, believe it or not. But I love connecting with people one-on-one. So if you're in the area and you want to connect, just email me. My email's info@wild-soul.net.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so this last question I'm asking everyone, and maybe you kind of already touched on it, but I'm asking, like, if you could sum up, now that you've gone through everything that you've gone through and given birth and you're a year postpartum, what would you tell yourself, like if you could go back in time, before you had your baby, and whisper just one little piece of advice in one sentence? If you could boil it down, what would that be?
One sentence. You are capable.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love this question because so many women say something really similar, It's interesting, like that we find, I think, our strength when we become mothers, and then we can carry that on throughout the rest of our lives, hopefully, and our children can take that too, right?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I have a friend who has triplet babies, and
oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm gonna cry just thinking about her strength and watching her. And it can be kind of maddening, actually, to go out in public with her and her babies, because people are always like, what, 3, how do you do it, blah blah blah, like all these unnecessary comments. But one of the biggest ones is always like, how do you do it, right? And I mean, how do you do it? You just do it. You wake up in the morning and you do it, because you really don't actually have any other choice.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, well, I suppose you do have a choice, really, but your choice to continue to show up and be present with whatever your life is handing you. Like, it blows me away the strength that comes from those moments of feeling like everything is going to break, that everything's going to fall out from under your, you know, the foundation is breaking from under your feet. And to be able to like live through those moments and come out the other side and be like, whoa, I am a strong badass, you know, or see those around you who are doing that. Like, it is so much of a reminder of our resilience as women, as mothers, as human beings, as earth beings, you know, to be able to show up and to persevere in the face of the odds. So yeah, definitely that would be my reminder. You are capable.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and your wisdom with us today. I really, really greatly enjoyed it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And yeah, have a wonderful rest of the day by the ocean.
Yeah.
Bye.